The full episode is now available on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Please see the link in the description for more details.
So someone here asked me a question in regards to the tapestries. So you have this idea that Littlefinger wants the tapestries. It's a moment. Was it Clash for Kings? Clash of Kings, where Cersei sends Littlefinger tapestries from Robert's reign.
That's actually in all the way in A Feast for Crows. So the tapestries originally appear in A Game of Thrones. The walls. So Robert, when fucking tapestries. So the original tapestries, or originally the throne room under the Targaryens had a bunch of dragon skulls on the wall, and it's actually a change for House of the Dragon that they put the dragon skull of Balerion like underground already. Like, I think every time after the Dance of the dragon skulls like ended up on the walls, and so of the throne room, but Robert didn't want that, so he had them all removed and put them down in the basement, where Arya has her whole scene with the dragon. I guess Tyrion and Shay go down there too, and so he put up on his throne room walls scenes of hunt, and we just kind of know these as Baratheon tapestries with scenes of hunt in them, and that's about all we know about the content of them. And so Cersei, when she comes in, is like, I don't like anything that reminds me of Robert. So she takes them all down, and Sansa actually sees them like in the corner, the tapestries, and then they kind of disappear, these tapestries, and then in A Feast for Crows, Cersei 4, everybody's saying, hey, what's going on with Littlefinger and the Vale? The Lords Declarant are causing trouble. And Cersei's like, yeah, Littlefinger hasn't sent me anything about any trouble. In fact, the only thing he sent me was a request for some old tapestries of Robert's that I'm going to send him. And I'm like, okay. And so Cersei apparently sends the tapestries to the Vale, and then Littlefinger, gets them out, and he gifts them to Royce, the junior Royce branch. So they're out there at the gates of the moon, and so everybody's like, a lot of fans kind of say, well, what's up with these tapestries? Like why is this random thing, like this random item keep appearing in the story? Like, it has to be important, right? It has to be important. Like, why are these tapestries going from Robert to Cersei to Littlefinger to Nestor Royce? Like, what does it mean? And so there's various theories about it. And so you can go from the boring to the more interesting. So do you want like the most boring of the theories on what the tapestries are?
Is the most boring one is that Littlefinger is trying to convince Vale lords and supporters in the Vale that Joffrey and Tommen are bastards because the Baratheon tapestries...
that's the more interesting.
Oh, okay, that's what I know of it. What's the most boring one?
The most boring is that Littlefinger gets these tapestries and hangs them up to let everyone know that to remind everybody that the throne and the Lannisters support Littlefinger.
What?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
That, like, of course, like, everybody already knows that. Like, yeah, they give you Harrenhal. Like, yeah, obviously, like, the Lannisters support you. But he's like, nah, it's so that he can hang him up and everyone will be reminded, oh, yes, Cersei sent him those tapestries. Cersei must like Littlefinger. That's, like, the most boring of the theories. Is that, like...
Okay, but also possible. Okay.
Sure, but it's also, like, why would George R. R. Martin go out of his way to, like, bring back these tapestries that could have easily it's just one of those things from Game of Thrones. It's like, who cares about those tapestries? Like, you didn't need to bring them back, but now that he's brought them back, it's like, whoa, why did you bring these back? But the most boring of the theories is just like, oh, it's just to show people that Cersei likes him, and that there's nothing special about him. The more interesting theories are like, oh, that maybe if they're Baratheon banners, they would show Baratheons in them, and therefore they would have the black Baratheon hair, and people would be reminded that Tommen is a bastard, and they would look at Maya Stone, who's there in the Vale, as proof, and that essentially that they play the same role as the book from A Game of Thrones. Because the original plan for what John Arryn was doing was that he was going to have the book in one hand, and he was going to have Gendry in the other. And he was going to say, look, this is like what Robert's real child looks like. And this book tells us like lineage and what happens, marriage and children. This is proof that like the children are bastards. And so in a sense, it's kind of the same thing, but in this place of Gendry, you have Maya Stone, and in place of the book, you have the tapestries.
Interesting. Yeah, we've discussed this before. I never heard about the boring part.
Because why would you hear about that? Like, it's like the most boring theory. Like, like it just like, okay, like what a theory. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the tapestries, and you wanted to also bring in something about garters and in regards to Hot D.
Well, this has more to do with this is actually dropped from Hot D. So in my latest overanalyzing House of the Dragon, we get things start getting heated as once again I'm like saying that there's no way that Harwin Strong is the father of Jace. Despite the fact that like, that clearly Gildain, the author of Fire and Blood,
is the George Standard.
The George Standard is trying to make us believe that Harwin Strong is the father of all of the children, including Jace. But it's just like timeline wise, things don't work with Jace. Harwin Strong probably didn't father Jace. He's got broken bones. He's not going to be near Rhaenyra because he can't be her sworn shield if he has broken bones. It's just, how is he getting in there to actually impregnate her? But prior to this, there's these issues of like, at the wedding between Rhaenyra and Laenor in Fire and Blood. This is not in Hot D at all. There's a tourney, and it's the Fire and Blood says that Rhaenyra bestowed a garter upon Harwin Strong, and Laenor gave a garter to Joffrey. Which, in the context of where it's placed, like clearly Gildain is trying to make us think that these were tokens in the tourney, and that they're choosing champions. They're using their garters, and by using garters, they're sexualizing it, and so it's used as evidence simultaneously that Rhaenyra is banging Harwin and that Laenor is banging Joffrey. This is like this implication of the garter, but in preparing this, and I wanted to like, when you think of a garter, what do you think?
It's like a sexy thing a woman puts on.
Right. Like you think those like mini suspenders on the top of stockings, right?
Right.
Right. And so like garters in medieval times were just like belts around somebody's calf to keep up their socks. So
yeah, isn't it usually like very, somewhat decorative and kind of cute and all that?
No. Like there's like the wedding garter, which this is all like derived from the garter. But the original garter, a garter originally was just like a ribbon or a belt that you tied around your calf to keep your socks up. Like that's an original garter. Like, Google, if you Google medieval garter, you'll see it's just like a ribbon or a belt that somebody's put around their calf. Now, but of course, like when George...
Oh, I see it here. This is not sexy at all.
Right. However, it's not sexy at all. But when George R.R. Martin like Garter only appears once in all of Ice and Fire, and it's that reference. And so when he says Garter and he mentions wedding, you're passing out garters at a wedding, you think of sexy wedding garter. Like you think of that thing high on a bride's thigh. And so that sexualizes the scene, and you're like, oh man, Rhaenyra is totally banging Harwin, and Laenor is totally banging Joffrey, garters. And then you kind of go, oh, well, it's just like a belt around your calf. Like, I guess that's not that sexy. But clearly he's trying to make it sound sexy. And especially when you're talking about weddings and garters, because like we have a garter tradition of throwing a garter at a wedding in the West. And it turns out that like the garter tradition of throwing a garter out, you've been to some weddings, Carmine?
Yes, but I don't remember this part.
So at a wedding, there's the bouquet toss and the garter toss.
Yeah, of course.
So the
garter toss.
Yes. So the bride throws her bouquet to a pack of women, and whoever catches it is lucky in love. And the man goes up the bride's leg, takes the garter off of her leg, and then he tosses it out to the men, and whoever the man who gets it is lucky in love, right? And so
this. Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't ever been to a wedding where this happened, but okay,
yeah,
interesting,
right? I mean, the garter, it's small and elastic, so it's not, and the men don't really care about it as much, so like it's not a bit like as much of a deal as the bouquet toss, because like at a wedding, the bride is in a really nice dress, and attention is on the bride, and she's throwing this bouquet, and a bunch of women are fighting over it, and it's much more of a spectacle, while the men are like, who cares? This tiny little elastic thing that you can barely see. Like sometimes he'll like slingshot it out, and it's not that big a deal. But the point is though, like garter, wedding garter, like all brides have this garter. We associate garters with weddings. We think of them being sexy because they're high on the thigh of a bride. And so in a sense, like the scene from Fire and Blood, like it only really works if we're thinking about it in a modern sense for being sexy. And so like the sexualization of the scene like only works in a modern sense, but then all of a sudden, like if you start looking at it gets more complicated when you start looking at the history of the garter toss. So the garter toss actually comes from the bedding ceremony. So in medieval times, there was a bedding ceremony, and to grab a piece of clothing from the bride and groom was considered lucky. But people didn't want to get groped. So they started throwing the clothes at people in order to not get groped. Be like, yeah, here's our clothes. Don't grope us and tear it off. And so the garter was something that was being thrown because it was part of the bedding ceremony to get torn off. So now we're talking like, wait a minute. When Rhaenyra and Laenor are giving out garters, like, or people are getting garters, like, are we talking about the bedding ceremony? Are we even talking about like the tourney anymore? Like it starts getting really weird and confused. Like, and at some point, like I don't even know what George R.R. Martin is thinking, because at this point, because he kind of like shoves in this line and never mentions garters at all ever in Ice and Fire, but. When you talk about garters and weddings, you have a single idea, and it's related to the bedding ceremony. And I think he would know about how the garter is the bedding ceremony. So when like Harwin gets the garter, is he actually at the tourney getting bestowed a garter as a champion in the joust, or are we talking about the bedding ceremony and he just happened to get a garter? That she threw a garter. Because they're getting stripped for the bedding ceremony, and he happened to get one. Like it's all really.
It really depends on how much research George did. Weren't you one of the people that kind of criticized George on his lack of research for some things, or that he just didn't really care that much to do the research?
I mean, look, he's done. No, I mean, I joke about it because he does an incredible amount of research, but every human being is going to be wrong. So like he gets things wrong, like Morningstar. He fucked up. He doesn't know that Morningstar.
That's what it was.
Morningstar. He screwed up Morningstar and Flail. He screwed up. He mentions boiling oil. Like boiling oil didn't exist in medieval times. It was a myth. It was only boiling water. Lord's right to the first night was not actually a thing. Like that's another myth. You know, like, and yet that's part of Ice and Fire. So there's a lot of things that like weren't part of real medieval history that are in the story, like rushes. He talks about rushes being everywhere and people putting down fresh rushes, and rushes being this. Rushes were not that big of a thing, and like there's all sorts of these like little things that like became myths of the Middle Ages that he's included in his fantasy story that are not actually part of the Middle Ages. And then a lot of fantasy elements that wouldn't be there, like telescopes and stuff like that, and crossbows and like certain types of crossbows and stuff like that that are just anachronistic. But like, so yeah, like, so you come to something like the Garter and you don't know how much like research he's done and what he's trying to say. You know, is he actually, do you take it at face value and go, no, like, you know, Harwin Strong was actually a champion, and Rhaenyra like lifted up her dress inappropriately and pulled a garter off and in front of all the lords and ladies of Westeros when she's trying to be like taken seriously as the heir to be queen, or you know, is the author like being ridiculous and biased and trying to make the bedding ceremony look like something, to make a situation where she's having sex with Laenor into a situation where she's having sex with Harwin, you know?
That's a good point. By the way, we went over this chapter. I'm pretty sure we did, because this is like beyond the moment. We went over, for those of you who don't remember, we're going over House of the Dragon, not House of the Dragon, what's it called again? The book
Fire and Blood?
Get going. Fire and Blood. Thank you. We were going over Fire and Blood. I'm pretty sure we covered this part.
We did. We got into the dance. We got into Princess and the Queen material.
We're at the part where we're on Rhaenyra triumphant. That's where we are. And no wonder you're overanalyzing this, because I do not remember this whole Garter thing at all. It's one of those things where it just goes over your head and you like read over it, right, and you don't think about it a second thought.
Right,
but I see what you mean.
I mean, just thinking about this line, like in a, because you know, you've got modern eyes thinking about it through the story and through a biased story, and so it's like there's all these things affecting one when one reads the line, you know, like, am I supposed, like, you know, Rhaenyra giving a garter, like, and you don't know how to interpret it, like, you don't know,
because in the modern sense it's like sexy and we associate it with such, but in medieval times it was just part of tradition, so it's not really clear whether or not she gave Harwin Strong a garter because they're secretly lovers, or because it's just a thing she gave one of her champions for good luck.
Or maybe it was the bedding ceremony, you know, like, and things are getting confused. Like, it could be that, like, giving a garter was no big deal. It could be that. It was just, like, it's just a belt on her calf. Like, maybe that wasn't that big of a deal. Or it could be that, like, no, the calf, I mean, in our own Middle Ages, like, the calf on a woman is, like, incredibly sexy, but and that would be super risque, but is it that risque in Ice and Fire? Because Ice and Fire is freaking weird. Because Ice and Fire, there's a hell of a lot more sex workers in Ice and Fire than there was in like actual history. You know, all this other crazy stuff going on. Like Ice and Fire is more violent and there's more sex than our real history. So, you know, you just don't know. You don't know. Like, there's just so much ambiguity. So, about this stupid garter.
Sounds like it's... I want to give George the benefit of the doubt and say that was the point, to make it ambiguous as fuck, but at the same time, this could have very well been a mistake that worked out in the end either way.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's something that just, you stumble into something cool. Oh, I didn't even mean for the garter to be thought of in that way. Oh, I was just picking a random thing, because she could have chosen like a ribbon from her hair. But
right. Do you remember, you were telling me about this years ago about, excuse me, you were telling me about how during the HBO's Watchmen podcast, the interviewer was interviewing, was it Lindelof who was behind the whole thing? Yeah.
Damon Lindelof.
He was interviewing Lindelof, and he read into like a scene, and he's like, oh, when you did this, you really meant this and this and this. Is that correct? And Lindelof's like, yeah, sure. Why not? Why? Like, totally didn't mean to do it. You remember what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah,
it was one of the podcasts they did. And like, people really read into it, and the author just goes, you got me. That's totally it. Which is such bullshit. I think
in that situation, he was like, I didn't think about that, but now that you say it, I'm totally saying it is. I think he was like, that's pretty cool, and I'm gonna, from now on, say that was the case, or something like that. It was something,
Right, and I think this. There you go. It worked out in the end for George.